Today I'm showing you the best way to add interactions to your Unreal Engine game. We're going to make a button blueprint and we're going to make that interact with multiple objects within the scene. The best thing about this approach is it leaves the decision making up to the artists, who can drop buttons into the scene and drop animated doors and other blueprints and communicate efficiently and fast. Create a new trace channel for our interactable. So come over here to project settings, type in trace for trace channel. Interactable, and default response needs to be ignore. So in our character blueprint here, let's right click and create a custom event. We'll name that trace. Now we want to create a line trace by channel, and we want to make sure to set that channel to interactable, that channel we made earlier. And we want to grab a reference to our first person camera there, and let's get the forward vector. Now we should also get the world location, and let's multiply this forward vector by a float. So we right click and convert this to a float. We want to promote this to a variable. I'm going to call this something sensible like interactable distance. Now we want to add the world location to this vector we just created and plug that into the end, making sure to also plug in the world location into the start. Now hold B, create a branch, and let's connect this boolean value in here. We'll also break the hit result of this line trace, and we want to promote this hit actor to a variable and promote the hit component to a variable as well. Connect these up to the true. And we want to copy these two and paste them here. We want to make sure to do this so we set the value of these to nothing as we move around. Now come up to our camera input, and now we're just going to call that custom event we created every time the player moves their mouse. Last thing to do is to make sure we set the interactable distance value to something. I'm going to use 250. So now we want to set up our switch blueprint. When we press the E key, we want to speak to the switch blueprint, and when that happens we want to affect an array of actors. Come over down here to blueprints. I have a blueprints folder. Create a blueprint class of type actor. I'm just going to call it BP underscore button. Button plinth and wall switch. So what you can do is you can select them two in the content browser. Come over to button, add component, type in static, and you should see here static mesh multiple assets, and that will bring in the two assets that we just had selected in the content browser there. I'm going to pull my button up. Now if you are using meshes like this, just ensure that the mesh you don't want to interact with, for example this plinth here, has proper collision set up. So if I go to show collision here, you can see I've used the convex to create a collision here. And for our button mesh, this is the button mesh that we actually want to interact with. We want to come over to here and make sure that this also has a good collision here. So click apply, and you can see we've got collision. And then come over to the button inside the blueprint, and we want to come over to here, and you can see we've got block all dynamic. Now keep this selected and then go to custom. Now what we're going to do, come over to interactable here, and we're going to do block. So now this will block the interactable trace channel. Drop it in here, let's rotate it. If we actually play here and walk over to it, we should be getting a hit result. Now what we can do is we need to add a input action. So what we do is come over to our first person, input, and we come over to here, we have all these free input actions. We want to add a new one. We want to create a new one actually in here in actions, and I believe it's under input action. I'm going to call it IA underscore interact. This will be the button you press to interact with things. We want to make this a bool, and the triggers we want it to be pressed. Come back over to that IMC default and add interact here. Don't forget to press the key value. I'm going to just use E for now. And then we come back into our first person character, and let's see if we have that input action now. So if we do interact, we should see IA underscore interact. So the next step is we need to create our interface. Now the interface will be how things communicate between each other, and they're quite simple. So let's just create this here. Come under Blueprint and Blueprint Interface, and we'll call it BPI for Blueprint Interface _ interact. Open this up and we'll see we need some functions here. The first one, we'll just call this interact. Then we'll have another function called look at. And for interact, we want to have some inputs here. So we want to send this through. First one we're going to send through is the player character. There we go, BP first person character there. And we'll call this the player. The next input we want to add is a component. This will be of type primitive component. This will be, we'll call this hit component. This may be useful in the future for some more advanced interactions. Have that for interact and also for this. Add two more inputs here. Blueprint, first person character. Object reference, this will be our player again. And our hit component. Let's add the interact interface into here. Go to class settings, implemented interfaces, and add our BPI interact. And what you see here on the left is we now get this interfaces tab and we have these two buttons here. We can double click and create them here. And these will create events, or sometimes they will also create functions depending on how this has been set up. At the moment we don't have any outputs, but sometimes it may be useful for you in the future to have some sort of feedback. So what we can do is create a success here. We can do success question mark if it helps you out, and make that a boolean. You'll see it's give us a warning here, so delete this and do our interact, and you'll see now it's gone into a function available at the side here, because we need to feed the function back as success or not. Now this can be useful, for example, if you want to interact with something but you want to check whether it failed or not. Maybe you want to see whether a player actually opened the door, or maybe there was a problem. It can help with debugging and stuff like that. So I'm going to keep it like this, and we're going to build around this. So we have our input action for interact here. When it's triggered, we want to interact with our actor. So pull out our hit actor here, hold control to get it, and we want to ask, does it implement the interface? Now we can put in our BPI interface here, and it's going to give us a true or false here. Triggered. To make sure that this also doesn't fail, you can right click this and do convert to validated get. And so, does this actor contain an interface? If it does, then we want to interact with. So pull off this, interact. And our target is going to be our hit actor again. And we can connect it to there, or you can drag another one if you want it to be a bit cleaner. Our hit component is actually going to be this component here, hit component. This is the one we set down here. And our player is going to be basically our self, so we can actually do a, not a get, sorry, we can pull off here and do a self. So now we have this button blueprint. What we need to do is we want to interact with things around the world. For example, I have a turntable, I have some lights here, I have some rec lights here. The way in which we do that again is with the interfaces or via just a standard reference system. So let's go into our button here. And we want to create a variable for the item we want to interact with. I'm going to call this turntable, because that's what this is. This is going to be of type blueprint turntable. Make it an object reference and make it from single to an array. This turntable is quite a simple blueprint. It has a trigger here that will pause and unpause timers, and this timer basically acts like an event tick, adding some rotation. It's quite simple, but at the moment I have no way to trigger this. So what we want to do is add an interface here. We want to add BPI interact interface. So I actually already have it here. So what you would do is just add the interface here. So I have interact, and on this interact I just want to call trigger. This trigger basically just refers to the trigger inside of this blueprint, and it will pause and unpause the timer, making it spin. Now in our button, we have this turntable we just created, and it's an array. Make it visible so we can change it in the level. Pull it off here, and let's just do a for each loop. So for every array item we have, we're going to trigger it, for example. Compile. And now we come over to our button. We'll see here on the right we have a variable here called turntable, and we can select turntables from our level. For example, there's the only one we have at the moment. Over here, press E, and there we are, trigger, and we can stop it as well. Yeah, as shown here with this one, I call trigger here, but I could also just as easily call interact. The beauty of this is sometimes it may not be just a custom event, you may have some other code in there, so it's always best to... While this method does work, having turntable, having sign, it is quite cumbersome to have to constantly add the actual reference to the thing, so we can actually, because we're using interfaces, we can actually make it quite generic. So we can create a new variable here and call it generic blueprint. I'm going to delete my old one and make it visible. And this is of type actor. So just come over here and type actor here, object reference, and again, make it an array. Now pull this out, get it, and let's do a for each loop. Pull it off completed here and reconnect this down here. So this generic array will allow us to select multiple different blueprints within the level. And what we can do is we can check if it does implement an interface. Select BPI interface. Hold B to get a branch. Is it true? If it is true, we want to pull off this. Add a reroute just to make it a bit tidier here. And we want to do an interact. Connect this to true. And if we go into our level here, we can see we have a button and we have generic blueprints in here. I can add, for example, this door. I can add this light here. And now this blueprint will interact with both. And it has generic things on there. That is the better way to do it if you know that many blueprints will have interfaces. So that's how we interact with other blueprints, but maybe you can also use this to interact with, for example, lights in your level. So at the moment, these rectangular lights currently are just free floating in the level, and we want to control these, so we can do that as well. Let's go into our blueprint because it's quite open in what we can do, and let's call this lights. And this is of type rect light because these are rect lights in the level. Come to rect light, object reference, and once again it's going to be a array here. Go back into our interact, disconnect this, get our lights, and what do we want to do to these lights? Once again, for each, and let's say we want to toggle the visibility, which will turn them on and off. We can do that. Pull off this rect light component. Make sure to connect this return back to the end. Connected, and this will toggle them on. So make sure as well, we need to click down here, visible in the level, come over to here, come back to the button and add these lights. You can see I actually only have 3 lights in the level, or 4. We can add 1, 2, 3. Let's just leave the 4th one on. And we can see here, this button now turns the lights on and off as well. So I think that covers everything I wanted to show you today. Shows you how we can interact between different blueprints and how we can make things quite simple. I'll show you a bit more advanced options in the future, maybe passing over to player controller and hit actor. So maybe we can do more complex things within blueprints to make it a bit more fun or interactable. But for now, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.